The ASPxGridView and Editors Library is a powerful, feature-rich library that contains our grids as well as a ton of editors that allow you to work seamlessly using callbacks and XHTML to provide a great web experience. And today we're going to take a look at what it's like to get started with the ASPxGridView, and we'll do a simple project where we'll data bind the ASPxGridView to an Access data source, as well as take a look at what it's like to enable some of the powerful features like grouping, sorting, filtering, and editing, as well as look at some of the places where you can find further help on how to approach a certain scenario or find a certain method and how to use a control. So let's take a look. For this screencast, I've already gone ahead and imported in the nwin.mdb access data file, which you can find in our demos folder. And we have a blank default ASPX page here. Now let's drop the ASPxGridView on there, which you can find under the DX Web tab. Double clicking on it will drop it onto the form, as well as dragging and dropping. Now we need a data source to point to the access file. And there's one of two ways you can do this. You can either just select the choose data source and select new data source, or you can actually drop the data source yourself by going to the data tab and double clicking on access data source. I'll click on the configured data source and we'll point to our access file. We'll click on browse, app data, Northwind MDB. And now we'll select the table. We'll choose customers and just select some of the fields from customers. Now we'll also want to generate the statements that allow us to do editing. So we'll click advanced and select the insert, update, and delete statements. We'll click next, test query, and click finish. Now we'll bind it to the ASPxGridView, and you'll notice the ASPxGridView will go ahead and generate the columns that we selected in our access data source. Now let's run the project and take a look. Without doing any coding, we've already binded up the ASPxGridView. As you can see, we also have sorting right built in without enabling anything, as well as paging that we have built right into the control. Now let's enable some of the other powerful features. If we select Show Group Panel, this will enable grouping, where you can drag one of the columns in there to group. We'll also enable editing, inserting, and selection, and we'll also enable filtering. Now let's take a look at these features in action. Enabling editing and inserting gives us this command column with these command buttons called Edit and New. New will create a new row for us where we can insert in our own value. Once we click Update, it will insert the value. Or we can click Edit to edit the current row. By default, it's going to choose one of the edit modes. This is the edit, shows the current edit row being edited, so you can see the current values as well as the new values you'll be changing them to. Selection will give us checkboxes that allow us to highlight the rows. Now filtering can be done through one of two ways. We can just start typing things like Berlin. It'll sort by finding that row for us. Or we can say use a wildcard. So let's say we want to find everything that ends with the word horn. So we can use % as the wildcard and type in horn, and it will go find just that row. To clear it, I can either select and remove this using the delete key, or I can use this button that's created when you type in something into the filter area. Now let's take a look at some of the other features of the ASPxGridView. Built into the ASPxGridView, we have auto formats. These are themes that you can use to provide some different formatting besides the custom. Out of the box, we have things like black glass, some of the office themes. I'm going to choose black glass just for this demo. Now it's going to import in the images and styles to our project, and it's going to ask us to confirm this, so we'll click yes. Now let's take a look at our grid again. As you can see, we have images and styles applied using the black glass theme. Even on the callback, we have a different image here, as you can see. Let's take a look at some of the other few features in here. You can use the columns editor here to find the columns in there and modify some of their settings, like their edit form behavior. If there's a currency value, you can set its display format string, as well as add columns. You can change their type, insert, remove. There's a lot of things you can do through the columns editor. The client-side events, it actually lets you use and add client-side functionality. As you can see, there's a ton of methods there. And one of the more powerful features of the grid are these edit templates. Templating lets you embed things like another grid for master details or even in a page control. It's very powerful. And you can also find help for client-side documentation right through this link that'll bring up our client-side API documentation. And a client-side API documentation actually has a very simple way to find it. So for the ASPX grid view, you can type in ASPX client grid view, just like you can with any of our other controls. So if we're looking for the client side events for ASPX page control, we type in ASPX client page control, and you can see it'll bring it up. And finally, if there's some help that you need from support, you can also click the Smart tag and click the Get Support help file, which will bring up the Support Center, which is one of the areas you can use to find help and answers to a lot of questions. So for example, you can see that we have our product selected here, the ASPX grid view. Let's say we wanted to figure out how to use it with a pop-up control. I'll simply type in pop-up, hit enter, and as you can see in the results, there are a ton of samples here, as well as knowledge base articles, which are articles written by the support staff, and code samples. Code samples are access to our Code Central, and there's a video on how to use this as well, but you can see demos right within Code Central, as well as download a demo locally to your own system and run it. Now, on top of the Support Center, you can also find a lot of things through our blogs. And through our community link, we have access to a TV site as well, where you can find a ton of content. So if you just go to tv.devexpress.com, you'll find a ton of videos and screencasts that we've done. You can just click on the product you're looking for and find a bunch of lessons on this as well. And through our community site, our blogs, there's always a ton of things happening. You can find articles on how to use a certain type of feature within our ASPX controls, as well as the forums. And it's also a great area to find answers as well as see how a certain method might be used. And finally, let's take a look at some of the online documentation. If you go to the product page, you'll see under documentation, we have online documentation, links to the blogs that I mentioned, as well as online tutorials. The online documentation is a great way to find and look up a specific method or what type of event to pass and so forth. And we have it available for our WinForms, ASP.NET, as well as reporting and business app frameworks. On the online documentation, you may want to look at task-based help. These are how-tos on how to do things like data editing, navigation, focusing, appearance and layout. And finally, don't forget the online demos. The online demos not only show how to use a certain feature, but also it contains all the code right on the page so you can implement this yourself. So thanks for checking out the video, and we encourage you to play with all the features and demos, and if you have a question, feel free to email our support. They'll be happy to answer or post a question in the forums, and thanks for watching.